poor rancher paid one for a broken wagon. Inside was a baby wrapped in his wife's quilt. The morning rain had turned Main Street into a churning river of mud and forgotten dreams. Samuel Creek stood in the doorway of Hartwell's general store. The water rising around the wagon wheels and horse hooves like the town itself was swallowing everything whole. His stomach pressed hard against his backbone, hollow and gnawing, empty as the cabin he'd abandoned before dawn. 3 days without a proper meal, 2 weeks since he'd sold his last chicken, and the dollar coin he held in his palm felt like the last ember of a fire long dead. Flour and beans, that's what it would buy. Enough to stay alive, just barely. But the wagon called to him. It sat crooked in the street, canvas flapping against its battered ribs like a wounded animal gasping for breath. One wheel bent beyond repair, another missing entirely. Rain pooled in the folds of its tarp, dripping like a clock counting down to nothing. The family who had owned it had vanished into the mist that morning, their thin shoulders bending under burdens heavier than the mud beneath their boots. He'd watched the man's boots held together with wire, the woman carrying a baby whose cries would have broken his heart if he hadn't been numb for so long. Piece of junk. Hartwell spat into the mud, his words sharp and wet. But $1 and it's yours. Would still good for burning. $1. Samuel turned it over in his calloused fingers. $1 could buy survival or something more. Winter would come early. He could feel it in his bones. See it in the way the leaves clung to the cottonwoods too long before letting go. His cabin was a skeleton of logs, gaps wide enough to throw a cat through. But the wagon, oak thick and solid, iron that could be melted down, canvas to patch his roof, walls to keep out the cold that could kill a man in a night. For the first time in years, he believed that life could be tender, that love could endure, that even broken hands could hold something whole. The first week was relentless, a storm of hunger, sleepless nights, and the kind of helplessness that carved lines into a man's face. Samuel discovered, in ways no book or neighbor could have prepared him for, that babies demanded more than food. They demanded presence, patience, and a heart willing to bend. Hope cried for reasons he could not name, for needs he could not yet meet, and her small body pressed against his chest with stubborn strength. Every scream and wail tested him, but Samuel discovered that persistence, even his own, could soften the sharpest edges of despair. By the second week, a fragile rhythm had begun to form. Hope no longer fought the bottle as fiercely, her dark eyes watching him, searching for familiarity in hands that still trembled. Samuel spoke to her as he worked, telling her of the cabin's gaps, the broken fence, the weather, and of Mary, the woman whose laughter once filled these walls and whose quilt now wrapped her granddaughter's tiny body. Mary always wanted children, he whispered one morning, sunlight streaming through the window to catch the roses on the quilt. Used to say children were God's way of reminding folks that hope still lived in the world. Guess that makes you hope, little one. Hope wrapped in roses and love. The name clung to her like a promise. When Samuel said it, her eyes lifted to his, steady and searching, as though she understood that her world was now held in a man's hands who had long since forgotten how to care for anything so small and delicate. Yet love did not feed an empty stomach, and care did not buy clean clothes or warm bottles. Samuel made the hardest decision he had faced in years. His last cow, Bessie, would have to go. She had been his companion, his workmate, a piece of the life he once knew. But Hope needed milk she could actually drink, and soft cloths to wrap around her skin. Walking Bessie to town felt like a funeral march, each step dragging him through memories and loss. Townspeople paused to watch, their gazes heavy with curiosity and judgment. Old Hartwell met him outside the general store, cash in hand, sympathy in his eyes. "Hate to see you part with her," he said, running a hand along Bessie's flank. "Got something that needs milk more than I need a cow," Samuel murmured, avoiding the old man's gaze. Inside the store, Samuel spent every cent on things he'd never imagined he'd need. Bottles and rubber nipples, soft cotton for diapers, powdered milk mixed with water until it was drinkable, and a small wooden rattle carved like a horse, because he thought Hope might need something to hold, something to call her own. The walk home, though weighed down with purchases and empty pockets, felt lighter. Hope lay in her makeshift bed, a drawer from Mary's dresser lined with the softest cloth he could find. When she saw him, her tiny mouth curved into the first real smile Samuel had witnessed in 3 long years. His heart stopped, then beat so fiercely he could feel it in his throat. "Well, I'll be," he whispered, setting the packages down, hands trembling. "Look at you, Hope. Just look at you." Days blurred into weeks, measured in diapers changed, bottles warmed, and nights spent rocking a small, fragile life to sleep. Samuel learned to navigate this new existence, rough hands softening as they brushed her hair, lifted her without jarring, patted her back in a rhythm that soothed both of them. He even traded his father's old pocket watch for a proper cradle, a symbol of trust in a world that had long been cruel. The carpenter, Ellis, handed him the cradle, carved with roses like those on Hope's quilt. "A man's got to choose what's worth keeping," he said quietly, and Samuel felt the weight of the choice settle like a blessing in his hands. That night, Hope slept in the cradle, and Samuel watched from Mary's rocking chair, the roses glowing in lamplight, connecting everything. Her quilt, her bed, the small fragments of love that death could not erase. Outside, whispers followed him, townspeople questioning, judging, imagining motives Samuel could not care to explain. Inside, all that mattered was Hope, her fragile victories, the first laugh that bubbled from her belly 3 months later, filling the cabin with music he thought he had lost forever. When she laughed, Samuel's heart opened in a way it had not since Mary died. He felt full, complete, as if he had been carrying an emptiness he did not even know existed until it was replaced by love. And yet, even as joy bloomed, he understood the truth he had not yet learned to face. Gifts this precious come with thorns. He had learned to love again, to hope again, to hold something fragile in the palms of broken hands. But he had yet to learn how to let go, how to protect the heart that risked breaking all over again. Seasons turned like pages in a book Samuel never wanted to finish. Spring brought wildflowers that Hope reached for with chubby fists, pulling at the petals as if she could catch the sun itself. Summer taught her to crawl across the cabin floor, exploring every corner like a tiny pioneer discovering the world anew. Fall came with swirling leaves that made her clap and laugh, delighting in the way they danced like spirits on the wind. And winter wrapped them both in quiet evenings by the fire, Hope babbling stories only she could understand while Samuel carved wooden toys, his hands learning to create instead of merely survive. Then came the day her first word broke across the cabin like a miracle. Pa, clear, ringing, unstoppable, like church bells on a Sunday morning. Samuel had been fixing a loose board when he heard it, and the hammer fell from his hands as if it had burned him. He turned to see Hope in her cradle, those dark, knowing eyes shining with intelligence, reaching tiny arms toward him. Samuel knelt beside her, chest tight with feelings he could not name. She was not his by blood, but by every heartbeat, every sleepless night, every act of care that had bound them together. When she pressed her cheek against his weathered face, he understood that love did not need legal claims, did not need promises written in ink. It only required hearts willing to give themselves fully. But hearts, Samuel learned, could break even when they were full. The riders appeared on a Tuesday morning in late spring, when Hope was 13 months old and walking with the confidence of a child who thought the world belonged to her. Samuel saw them from a mile away, 3 figures crossing the prairie, purposeful yet hesitant. His chest tightened, and a cold certainty settled over him. He knew who they were before they spoke. Hope played at his feet, stacking the wooden blocks he had carved for her during long winter nights. She wore Mary's quilt around her shoulders like a field of roses, her smile his daily sunrise. "Pa!" she said, holding up a block shaped like a horse. "That's right, little one," Samuel whispered, his voice thick and trembling. The riders stopped outside the cabin. A man, a woman, and a boy no older than 15. The woman's movements were cautious, hesitant, like someone afraid the ground would betray her. The man stood tall but weary, his face carved with lines of hard decisions and heavy grief. Silence stretched between them, a rope pulled taut, full of words no one dared say. Hope, curious yet cautious, pressed against Samuel's leg, gripping him as if he were the only solid thing in the world. The woman dismounted first, hands trembling as they hovered near her face. "Annie, oh my sweet Annie," she whispered. Hope tilted her head, confused by a name that held no meaning. Her eyes, so dark and intelligent, searched Samuel's face, seeking answers he did not yet have. The man spoke next. "Mr. Creek, I'm Thomas Miller. This is my wife, Sarah, and our son Jake. We've been searching for our daughter." Samuel's throat closed. He had known this day would come, known it like he knew winter followed fall. But knowing and being ready were two different things entirely. "She's Hope," he said quietly, his hands holding her a little tighter. Tears streamed down Sarah's face. "We called her Annie, our Anna. We lost her when our wagon broke. We couldn't carry her and everything else. We thought she was gone forever." Hope crawled closer to Samuel instinctively, seeking comfort. She wrapped her arms around his neck, and Samuel held her as the weight of the world pressed down on him. "She's grown so much," Sarah whispered, reaching toward her child. "She's healthy, happy." Hope's solemn gaze met Sarah's. She didn't reach out, didn't cry, but she watched, absorbing the faces and voices of people she didn't yet understand. Samuel shook his head when Thomas offered money.
"No.
"She's not something you pay for." Inside, Samuel's heart ached, each beat a drum of loss and love entwined. This child, his child in every way that mattered, was not his to keep. Sarah noticed the quilt around Hope's shoulders and gasped. "This quilt, where did it come from?" Samuel's voice was steady. "It was with her when I found her, wrapped around her in the wagon." Sarah's fingers traced the red roses delicately. "It was my mother's. She always said this quilt would protect those who needed it most. That love sewn into fabric never dies. It moves from one heart to another." The truth settled over Samuel like dawn breaking over the prairie. The quilt had carried love across time, across pain and loss, to reach the hands that needed it most. First Hope, then him, now her family. Hope fussed as she was settled into the Miller wagon, crying and reaching for Samuel, calling him Pa, in a voice that splintered his heart. He walked beside the wagon until it became a dot on the horizon. With every step, the ache inside him deepened, but beneath it came something he hadn't expected. Peace. Not happiness, not yet, but the quiet certainty that he had done right by the child he had come to love beyond measure. Hope would grow surrounded by her real family, learning to call them Mama and Papa. But somewhere in her heart, she would carry the love Samuel had given her. The nights held close, the care, the safety, the warmth. And maybe Samuel thought that was the greatest love of all. Not keeping her but letting her fly home. Not holding on, but giving her the gift of all the hands, hearts, and love that had saved her life. The wagon disappeared into the heat-hazed distance, and Samuel turned back toward his cabin. The wind whispered through the loose boards, the quilt of roses still in his memory, and for the first time in years, he felt a quiet bloom inside him. A new kind of hope, ready to grow again. So that's the story for today. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. On a scale of 10 to 0, how would you rate this story? And let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to know. We'll see you in the next video. Until then, stay happy and take care. And yet, even as joy bloomed, he understood the truth he had not yet learned to face. Gifts this precious come with thorns. He had learned to love again, to hope again, to hold something fragile in the palms of broken hands. But he had yet to learn how to let go, how to protect the heart that risked breaking all over again. Seasons turned like pages in a book Samuel never wanted to finish. Spring brought wildflowers that hope reached for with chubby fists, pulling at the petals as if she could catch the sun itself. Summer taught her to crawl across the cabin floor, exploring every corner like a tiny pioneer discovering the world anew. Fall came with swirling leaves that made her clap and laugh, delighting in the way they danced like spirits on the wind. And winter wrapped them both in quiet evenings by the fire, Hope babbling stories only she could understand while Samuel carved wooden toys, his hands learning to create instead of merely survive. Then came the day her first word broke across the cabin like a miracle. Pa, clear, ringing, unstoppable, like church bells on a Sunday morning. Samuel had been fixing a loose board when he heard it, and the hammer fell from his hands as if it had burned him. He turned to see Hope in her cradle, those dark, knowing eyes shining with intelligence, reaching tiny arms toward him. Samuel knelt beside her, chest tight with feelings he could not name. She was not his by blood, but by every heartbeat, every sleepless night, every act of care that had bound them together. When she pressed her cheek against his weathered face, he understood that love did not need legal claims, did not need promises written in ink. It only required hearts willing to give themselves fully. But hearts, Samuel learned, could break even when they were full. The riders appeared on a Tuesday morning in late spring, when Hope was 13 months old and walking with the confidence of a child who thought the world belonged to her. Samuel saw them from a mile away, 3 figures crossing the prairie, purposeful yet hesitant. His chest tightened, and a cold certainty settled over him. He knew who they were before they spoke. Hope played at his feet, stacking the wooden blocks he had carved for her during long winter nights. She wore Mary's quilt around her shoulders like a field of roses, her smile his daily sunrise. Pa! She said, holding up a block shaped like a horse. That's right, little one, Samuel whispered, his voice thick and trembling. The riders stopped outside the cabin. A man, a woman, and a boy no older than 15. The woman's movements were cautious, hesitant, like someone afraid the ground would betray her. The man stood tall but weary, his face carved with lines of hard decisions and heavy grief. Silence stretched between them, a rope pulled taut, full of words no one dared say. Hope, curious yet cautious, pressed against Samuel's leg, gripping him as if he were the only solid thing in the world. The woman dismounted first, hands trembling as they hovered near her face. Annie, oh my sweet Annie, she whispered. Hope tilted her head, confused by a name that held no meaning. Her eyes, so dark and intelligent, searched Samuel's face, seeking answers he did not yet have. The man spoke next. Mr. Creek, I'm Thomas Miller. This is my wife, Sarah, and our son Jake. We've been searching for our daughter. Samuel's throat closed. He had known this day would come, known it like he knew winter followed fall. But knowing and being ready were 2 different things entirely. She's Hope, he said quietly, his hands holding her a little tighter. Tears streamed down Sarah's face. We called her Annie, our Anna. We lost her when our wagon broke. We couldn't carry her and everything else. We thought she was gone forever. Hope crawled closer to Samuel instinctively, seeking comfort. She wrapped her arms around his neck, and Samuel held her as the weight of the world pressed down on him. She's grown so much, Sarah whispered, reaching toward her child. She's healthy, happy. Hope's solemn gaze met Sarah's. She didn't reach out, didn't cry, but she watched, absorbing the faces and voices of people she didn't yet understand. Samuel shook his head when Thomas offered money. No. She's not something you pay for. Inside, Samuel's heart ached, each beat a drum of loss and love entwined. This child, his child in every way that mattered, was not his to keep. Sarah noticed the quilt around Hope's shoulders and gasped. This quilt, where did it come from? Samuel's voice was steady. It was with her when I found her, wrapped around her in the wagon. Sarah's fingers traced the red roses delicately. It was my mother's. She always said this quilt would protect those who needed it most. That love sewn into fabric never dies. It moves from one heart to another. The truth settled over Samuel like dawn breaking over the prairie. The quilt had carried love across time, across pain and loss, to reach the hands that needed it most. First Hope, then him, now her family. Hope fussed as she was settled into the Miller wagon, crying and reaching for Samuel, calling him Pa, in a voice that splintered his heart. He walked beside the wagon until it became a dot on the horizon. With every step, the ache inside him deepened, but beneath it came something he hadn't expected: peace. Not happiness, not yet, but the quiet certainty that he had done right by the child he had come to love beyond measure. Hope would grow surrounded by her real family, learning to call them Mama and Papa. But somewhere in her heart, she would carry the love Samuel had given her. The nights held close, the care, the safety, the warmth. And maybe Samuel thought that was the greatest love of all. Not keeping her but letting her fly home. Not holding on, but giving her the gift of all the hands, hearts, and love that had saved her life. The wagon disappeared into the heat-hazed distance, and Samuel turned back toward his cabin. The wind whispered through the loose boards, the quilt of roses still in his memory, and for the first time in years, he felt a quiet bloom inside him. A new kind of hope, ready to grow again. So that's the story for today. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. On a scale of 10 to 0, how would you rate this story? And let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to know. We'll see you in the next video. Until then, stay happy and take care.